It may be a good idea to start with introductions, even though some of us met many times and some of us met last time, but still some are probably new faces, and it may be a good idea to do some quick introductions so we know who's here. I don't know, I can start. So I'm Bas Taras. I guess I know you all more or less, or at least have met you in these meetings. I'm in North Carolina. I am originally from Ukraine, and it's been about 23 years since I left Ukraine, so all around the place. And as I said last time, my specialization is primarily what people would call cross-cultural HR OB. So mainly people in cross-cultural context, but I'm also interested in topics like, for example, crowdsourcing in general, evaluation of the effectiveness of HR programs, and different types of interventions in teams. And then some general international business issues like immigration, like international trade and things like that, that are a little bit higher level. But since it's part of the courses I teach, I have developed some interest in those topics as well, although I usually don't publish on anything other than people. All right, that's me. Anyone else? Don't be shy.
Well, I can do that.
Go ahead, Mariana, yes.
I'm Mariana Gunke, and I was born in Finland, but I've spent, I think, pretty much half of my life somewhere else than in Finland. So I've lived a long time in Germany, and currently I'm living in Italy. And I do research on international human resource management, international OB, empirical studies, mainly quantitative, but also some qualitative studies.
And talking about Italy, Mariana, I think I didn't ask you, are you joining us for the X-Culture Symposium in Italy, since it's just across the street?
I have to confess that I wasn't really aware of that, because I'm not teaching.
Not too late.
When is that?
I'll send you the information. Well, since others might be interested, so it's July 29 to August 4.
Okay, I can already now tell no, because I'm in Finland then.
Okay, all right. Well, okay. So if anyone else might be interested in joining us, we'll have a fairly rich, intense program around all kinds of things, but it will also have a component that we would refer to as faculty development, but then also hackathon, research hackathon, just like the one that we are preparing now, will also be part of that meeting in Italy. And so we expect about 20, 30 professors total. So if any of you are interested in attending, let me know. It's not too late. All right, who goes next? Sharon, Jale,
yeah.
Justin.
This is Sharon. I can certainly go next. So yeah. I'm at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I'm originally from the UK. I've also lived and worked in Belgium and Germany prior to moving to the States, but I've been in the States a long time now. And my research is primarily in the area of teams. At least one of my research streams is in the area of teams. And I'm particularly interested in virtual teams, so geographically dispersed, technology-mediated, that's what we refer to as virtual teams, and looking at how different components of virtuality impact how teams function and their effectiveness. And I also have an interest in how culture plays out in teams. That's a developing interest.
Right.
And very interested in looking at that together with virtuality, because they often occur together, but are often have not been studied in a very integrated way. So I'm interested in bringing those two literature together.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Jale, do you want to go next? And then we'll go to Justin and Wendy.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Hope you're well. Nice to see you again. I'm Jale Samnani-Azad, assistant professor at Clarkson University. It's in upstate New York, but right now I'm in the New York City area for the summer. I'm Canadian. I grew up in Canada for most of my life. However, before that, I did live in the Philippines and in Iran. So I've lived in East Asia, Middle East, and North America. My area of research is on cross-cultural negotiation and diverse teams. Recently, I've gotten really interested in looking at subgroup formation and fault lines in teams over time. I'm really interested in understanding how deep level characteristics and cultural norms and values contribute to the subgroup formation in diverse team contexts.
And so far, the topics that you all are listing, at least the people in this group that I know they're interested in those topics. So I definitely already see some cooperative opportunities. So. And Jali, if I may ask, just curious, where in Canada are you from?
Toronto.
Because we have Justin, who is a Canadian, and he is from Manitoba, if I remember correctly, and Wendy is a Canadian. So I don't think either of them is still in Canada, or at least not always. But and I do have a Canadian passport, so I've been in Canada for a while. Though again, now lately in the United States. So yeah, we have a heavy Canadian presence here. So. Yeah. All right. Okay, so we have a few more people. Who wants to go next? We're doing quick introductions while everybody is gathering up. So since I don't.
Yeah, I'll go with you again.
All right, go ahead. That's Alex, I assume. Okay, Alex, the sound. Alex, we know that you were trying to say something, but the sound, at least on my end, is just basically noise. I'm not sure if the connection is bad. But let's try someone else for now, and then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, so who wants to go next? I don't know. Wendy, we mentioned your name. Maybe you can do it.
Sure, yeah, I wasn't sure who had already gone. So we're just doing quick introductions?
Yes, quick introductions, and then we'll brainstorm some initial, paper ideas and maybe initial feedback on
Okay, excellent. So you're right, I am Canadian. I'm also American, grew up in the States. I've lived in Canada for 12 years now, and at University of Waterloo in industrial organizational psychology. And my interest is in communication processes in multicultural workplace interactions. So I'm really excited to start looking at some of these things in the context of virtual multicultural teams. And I did read through the ideas that were posted and posted one of my own. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Thank you so much. Yes, very nice. All right. Who's next? Justin, and who else has joined just recently? Alex, if you want to try again. Do we have anyone else here? So yeah, Justin, if you still hear us, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? We have Justin and another Wendy who serendipitously met in Bangkok. So they're not really from there, either of them, but they just happened to be there at the same time, and so they decided to join together. So would you like to go ahead, guys? Hello, hello.
Okay, well, thank you so much. First of all, I want to say, hello, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
The sound is a little choppy, but we can hear you.
Okay, so first of all, I want to apologize for my emails. Someone corrected me, I think it was Sharon, that I sent out the wrong time. Again, I've just been traversing various time zones. So thank you for coming this time. Brief about me, so I'm a Canadian. I've lived in all kinds of different countries in Asia. Right now I'm working in Wisconsin, and I'm calling in from Thailand. So a little bit of travel. My research interests include intra and intergroup dynamics in various forms, in brief sum. I have beside me Wendy, different Wendy, maybe a Wendy with a Y.
Hi everyone, I'm Wendy with a Y. I'm American, but I've lived in Germany and a few other countries, and I'm currently living in Bangkok right now. I teach at Assumption University, and my research interests revolve primarily, probably a really long scope. I haven't narrowed it in yet. I'm very interested in that intersection between international business, technology, and cross-cultural communications and interactions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I will do a very quick introduction on behalf of Alex. So Alex Assad, he has been a part of the X-Culture team for a long, long time and helps us in all kinds of different capacities. So he is in Nashville, Tennessee, an assistant professor there, and his research interests are very close to what you all do. So basically people in cross-cultural context. Remarkable things about Alex is that at the next X-Culture symposium in October that we organize every year jointly with the Academy of International Business Southeast, So Alex is one of the people who is organizing it. And I'm not saying that Justin is organizing this one, I assume you know. So the meeting that we will have in Wisconsin, it's all basically a product of Justin's work. So Justin is doing all of that. So, and Alex will do the next one in October in Tennessee. And I believe Alex is originally from, he has all kinds of roots, but basically grew up in the United Kingdom too, and then has been in the United States lately for, I don't know, maybe about 10 years, if I'm not wrong, maybe more. So, but yeah, we have a very international crowd here. And so, yeah, so the plan for today is to exchange some initial paper ideas. Obviously, they will evolve a lot, and some of them maybe. Justin, did you want to say something? So the paper
before
idea.
we move into discussion of the
Oh yes, go ahead, please.
Just hold off to the paper ideas for a moment. I want to address some administrative issues. Voss introduced me so kindly as to say I'm I guess more responsible than most for our time in the cross. So one, I wanted to confirm with everyone that they have accessed the shuttle or can access the shuttle and have appropriately made arrangements to transport themselves from Minneapolis to La Crosse.
Alfredo and I made our arrangements 2 days ago. All we had to do was to call the phone number that you gave us in the email. A man picked up a phone right away and he asked what time we arrived. And then he said, okay, the best shuttle time for you will be this. Would you like to stay with it? I changed mine to stay a little bit longer in the airport so we can come to the campus together with Alfredo. His flight is like 2 hours later. But yeah, it was literally 2 minutes. So you just call, give him the number, and yeah, that's it. So if you haven't done it yet, I guess that's what should be done, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, good. The next one, I'm not going to make a big deal of it, but those of you who have officially registered and paid registration fees to become an official member of the conference, I'd like you at some point to wear a t-shirt that says so. So please email me your size of t-shirt so I can order that on your behalf.
Okay, I didn't know you did.
Finally, I've made some adjustments. Yeah, you do. Now you know.
Yeah.
Welcome to the family, Voss.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the last one is in the administrative folder in Dropbox, you'll see I've added all kinds of 2 maps and then a text file with useful information. Please use that folder or that subfolder in Dropbox as your go-to place as you not only commute but participate in the conference. There'll be all kinds of good information for you waiting in that folder. Okay.
So I assume you're talking about this folder, so you all should have access to the X-Culture Research Conference La Crosse folder, right? And so there is a subfolder admin. Is that the one, Justin?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I also created a folder there that says
that's right.
Data and code books. So all of the data code books are here. And then I see people started submitting research ideas for papers. They are here as well. And you can join that or access the folder using the direct link that Justin and I have emailed you a few times. Or I think Justin invited you to share the folder directly so you can have it in your Dropbox if you use Dropbox. So just basically with full access. Okay. All right. So let's then briefly talk about or start talking about the initial ideas for papers we have. I think Karen Linden has just joined us, so just to save time. Karen, can you hear us? Yes. Do you want to do a very quick introduction? So 2 words so people know who you are.
Okay, Karen Linden, UNCG, and I put some ideas out on the Dropbox this morning.
So Karen is right here in North Carolina, so we are colleagues in at the same school, university, and Karen has been involved for a long, long time in X-Culture. And again, that meeting in Italy that I mentioned a few minutes ago, Karen is actively involved in organizing it, so yes. All right, so then I guess now is a good time to start talking about the paper ideas. Obviously, it's okay if you show up in Wisconsin with a very, very vague idea as to what you want to do. We will still have some time or enough time to send you home with a clear paper idea and some initial feedback. But the sooner we start, the sooner we start discussing what we might work on, each of us, I guess the more we can accomplish in that research marathon that we will have in Wisconsin. And so I suggest we start with sharing the initial ideas that we have at this time, and then maybe receiving some initial feedback from the other people in the virtual conference room here. And by feedback, it can be literally just feedback in the standard sense, but also maybe people can provide some suggestions and maybe can steer it in the right direction so that the papers will be more publishable, let's call it this way, as well as, again, if during the discussion you see that somebody has an interesting idea and you want to join as a co-author, or you would like to invite somebody as a co-author, I guess we can start looking, at each other from that perspective as well. So, for example, the research ideas I have, I would not only prefer, I literally would need some co-authors because it seems like it's just too much work for one person. So I sort of invite you in advance if you would like to join on that project with me. And I'm not sure if you prefer to work alone, which is perfectly fine. But if in a team, then yes, we have more than enough people for that as well. So I don't know, who wants to start? Who has some ideas already?
May I maybe say something else? Interesting. I put in an idea and I read the other ideas. I find it, however, very complicated to say what is interesting for me, because it also seems like some of the ideas are very much related, and we probably could combine some to a bigger project. And therefore, I think it's a good idea that we think about this at the beginning, but I'm not quite sure how much we can agree on working together, or doing a project together prior to the meeting.
Right. Well, I think
it's really difficult.
Yeah, very good comment, Mariana. So there are two things that I need to say about that. One, first and foremost, the assumption is that everybody works alone. Or at least the default mode is that people work alone. And the reason for that is we welcome and encourage partnerships, but some people do prefer to work alone and may not want to have sort of, a big team that is, hard to manage. And so unless somebody really wants to work with somebody else and they see the fit, don't feel obliged to form teams. So yeah, it's perfectly fine to just move quickly and swiftly on your own. And that's a perfectly fine idea. Second, we also don't want to end up with multiple people working on the same project. So with Xculture, on the one hand, we are very, very happy to share the data, just literally put out the data files and let anyone download them at any time. And one of the reasons we haven't done it yet is because we are afraid that what may happen is multiple teams, multiple people may be working on the same project. Mm-hmm. And then you spend half a year writing the paper just to discover that somebody published it 2 weeks earlier. And so the process we have now is every time somebody approaches us and asks for the data, we ask what kind of study you would like to do. And then if it's a study that we already are working on, and let me show you, we have this page here that lists ongoing studies. And then somewhere here, there is a link to published studies. So if it happens to be a paper idea that is already either developed or in development, we just tell that person, what somebody's already working on it. And so you have two options here. You can refine your idea so that it's something different, or you can contact the lead author on that paper and see if they might be interested in working with you. Maybe you have something to contribute. Usually it's not a problem. People easily, refine the ideas. But just to tell you, for example, I must have received, I'm not kidding you, at least 25 inquiries where people say, can we take a look at, for example, whether or not cultural intelligence predicts, peer evaluations. And so obviously that's, such an obvious idea that it's, being used directly in prior studies. But again, more often than not, the idea that is committed is very different, and nobody thought about that, and so it's perfectly fine to develop it as a new study. And then once we have that new study idea, we just literally add it here to the list. So you can think about it as a patent. So if you come up with a new idea, you want to work on it, we will just list it here. You will be listed as the lead author. I'm just opening the random one. And so here it says researchers, you have two names. These are PhD students in Norway. And so, yes, if anyone wants to work on something like that, they can just contact those people and see where they can go from there. Finally, and I guess I should have said three things then, the lead author is the king. So if you come up with an idea, as I said, you either choose to work alone, but if you choose to work in a team, then again, you have the control. It's your idea and you decide how to manage it. So you don't have to worry about somebody coming and telling you how to do it or taking your idea away. The only thing, we put it even somewhere on paper at some point. If somebody comes up with an idea, but then the idea becomes sort of dormant, for years, nothing's happening, we will politely inquire if it's okay to maybe to kind of someone else takes over that idea and works on it. For example, we have a paper on proactive personality. Somebody came up with that idea a long time ago. We even wrote something about it. But then literally like for 3 or 4 years, nobody touched it. And so now we're trying to revitalize that paper with a different set of, or at least a new co-author. And then if the old people want to join, great. If they lost interest, no problem at all. But we wouldn't want that to vanish just because the lead author sort of lost interest. So things happen. So, but yeah, ultimately, if that's your idea, you decide how you go about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly say,
yes.
So I did post an idea that's attached to Wendy with an I, but at the same time, I'm actually more interested in working with a team and not being the lead.
Right. And that's again perfectly fine.
What's on my plate right now. So if we can come up with a way of letting each other know that we want to work with each other, that would be helpful as well.
Or maybe that we could, I, for example, would like to have somebody who is maybe very good in methods. Right. So if you could somehow post, who do you need? And then maybe we could form teams based on that.
Yeah. I should also add that when people submit an idea, on the one hand, I sort of hint that it may be advantageous to think about, inviting co-authors, mainly because, first of all, there are many knowledgeable people on our team who can help with the study. So I'm not talking about free writers who just will, become co-authors for nothing. So many people here can help. And in fact, you guys, like Mariana, for example, we have worked on a number of papers before. She's a wonderful, wonderful co-author. In fact, she's so good that we had some papers that even got some, top downloads where she literally does most of the work and, sort of almost sometimes feels it's a very, very responsible person, because sometimes you have a co-author who just disappears. So no, Mariana is extremely responsible. But some people, seem to be not sure how to, invite co-authors. So they're open to the idea, but they're afraid that if they say I'm open to co-authorship, there will be 25 people who will jump on that, bandwagon and will say, okay, I'll be a co-author, and then we'll do nothing. And so in those cases, I always recommend that they specifically indicate what kind of help they need. So sometimes people say, literally, I have an idea, but I need someone, with the method skills, someone to do the analysis. Or vice versa, I have the idea, I ran the tests, I have a good story, but I'm not very good with the theory. Maybe somebody can write a nice theoretical foundation for this paper. Or maybe I'm not a native speaker, so maybe I can have someone who will help me with writing. So I'll give you sort of kind of drafts, ideas, results, but somebody needs to package it into a nice, readable paper. So all of those are viable options, and you can literally specify upfront, this is the type of help I need. If you can help, please join me. But if not, don't. Because we've had a few cases, it worked out every time very well, but we've had cases when people say, yes, I would like to be a co-author, tell me what to do. And that may be potentially problematic because, tell me what to do, that's not always, we want people who know how they can contribute. So if it's telling me how to do, I can use my graduate assistant who will, do what I tell them to do. So for co-authors, from co-authors, we kind of expect a little bit more. But all of those are viable options. And going back to Wendy's comment, often I do prefer to be not the first author. In fact, we have a couple of papers, including with Justin, who just disappeared somewhere. So where I deliberately invited, it was my idea, but I invited Justin to be the first author, and he's leading the study on pedigree because, again, it's a great idea, but I just didn't have the time to, to play the role of the lead author. So it works out just fine for everyone. So no problem with that at all. All right, so who wants to start? Anyone wants to share an idea that you have?
I can again start.
Go ahead, please.
This is not a very well-developed idea, but in the HR literature, we see that employee satisfaction has a lot to do with their job performance, or employees' job performance. And there's obviously a positive influence of employee satisfaction on, for example, on various performance measures. So if you're satisfied, you work better. These kind of studies have, however, not usually been done in teams, especially not in international teams. And I was thinking maybe it would be interesting to see what influences team member satisfaction in a virtual multicultural team. That could be something like diversity in the team, or emotional intelligence, or cultural intelligence, or maybe even the gender distribution within the team. And then I would want to see how this satisfaction mediates maybe the performance. So maybe the grade that somebody is getting. So that was kind of in brief my idea that I thought would be interesting to look at. And I'm looking for somebody who's good in methods.
Any comments? I actually do have some, but I want to see if anyone else wants to comment on that. All right, well, let me say a couple of things here. I personally love the idea for two reasons. One, when you say team member satisfaction, we can look at this not only as a team member satisfaction, but also as a student satisfaction. So not only on from the perspective of international business and cross-cultural teams, but also pedagogy. For us, it's extremely important to keep the students happy, and it's very important to see why and what makes them happy. Like, for example, this semester, for the first time, we gave them 1 extra week to get to know each other. So before, like, once we formed the teams, first deadline, they have to come up with the, select the client, and then right away they have to do the SWOT analysis and whatever else at the subsequent. So we didn't want to waste any time on getting to know each other and get right to business. This semester, we gave them a whole separate week where all they have to do just to get to know each other. So we had a little like acquaintance test at the end. And so the peer average peer evaluations went up by about a standard deviation. So they always have been around 4.0 plus or minus like 3.9 to 4.1, hardly ever, above or below. And this time in both tracks, it was 4.3, even 4.4 at some time, which seems like a small increase. But as I said, when you look at the standard deviation, it's a huge bump. And so we don't know yet, we haven't really done the proper analysis if that's what that extra week, that's what caused that satisfaction. But if it did, it's a big important result. And so we're yet to see if it had any impact on performance, as Mariana said. But it seems like, things like that matter to professors, but also to the members of the teams. And I guess for managers, if you want to look at it from the kind of more organizational perspective. So I think it will be a very publishable paper, not only in IB journals, but potentially also like Academy of Management, Learning and Education, or perhaps Journal of Higher Education, or one of those outlets. So I don't know if anyone else has any comments or questions.
So I tried to check all these variables would be available. So there are various satisfaction.
Yeah, we have satisfaction. We have like 7 or 8 different things. Satisfaction with the project itself, satisfaction with the team members, satisfaction with your own performance, satisfaction with your professor, satisfaction, like there are literally 8 different satisfactions that we ask. And some of them I asked every single week, and some of them at the end about the whole project. And then performance, we, as you know, measure it every possible way, from individual, peer evaluations and things, all the way to the quality of the report itself. But as far as the predictors, who knows? It can be anything from personality to IQ to cultural intelligence to demographics to culture. Who knows? So it may be, I don't know. Some people say that you shouldn't do data mining, but I suppose if you're on a mission to discover what improves satisfaction, I guess that would be, yeah. So yes. All right. So any other comments on that study? Then let's see who goes next.
This is Sharon. I can certainly go next.
Please, go ahead. Yes.
Sorry, I think I've lost my video, but hopefully.
We hear you, yes.
Yeah, okay. So as I kind of intimated in my introduction, I'm very interested in how virtuality and teams impact things like team processes, team emergent states, so conflict, trust, those types of communication, those types of things. Even things like team norms, so crossing a lot of the ideas that were posted to the Dropbox. So and when we look at team virtuality, there are many different dimensions of it. So there's the use of different types of technology. there's the different types of dispersion that exist within the team, how many time zones are crossed, how far apart people are. So there are these different dimensions of virtuality. In some virtual teams research, culture is also considered a dimension of virtuality. I don't really consider it that way, but I am very interested in the interplay between, I guess, different dimensions of virtuality, possibly looking at interactions between different dimensions, but also looking at interactions between virtuality and different cultural values. And so this would be team level, looking at the composition of the team with regard to different cultural values and the dispersion within the team. And looking at, so this is very high level, but essentially looking at the interplay between those factors and how they then influence key team processes and states such as trust, conflict. I'm not exactly sure what team processes and states we have in the data set. I was trying to take a look. And then how that then impacts ultimate team performance. So that's kind of the general framework that I would be interested in exploring. Which team processes and states are totally open, or you could see how these things influence how the team develops over time. So I think there are just a lot of different options for the types of things that could be explored. And so I have spent some time looking at the literature on different cultural values. I'm quite familiar with it, but I wouldn't say that's my expertise. So would definitely be interested in working with someone who can bring kind of the culture piece to this. And I see myself as very well versed in the virtuality piece. So that was my idea.
Sharon, can you explain one more time what exactly is dimensions of virtuality? So of what they can be?
Certainly. So virtuality is most typically conceptualized as consisting of two primary dimensions, which are technology-mediated communication and geographic dispersion. Mm-hmm. But within those, then, there are different, let's say, subdimensions. And so one can look at, if one were just at a very high level looking at it from a technology-mediated communication perspective, one would look at, the extent to which a team relies on technology-mediated communication, because virtuality is on a continuum. It's not an either or. Mm. Now, clearly in the X-Culture teams, they're pretty much, there's really no face-to-face. So they're at the high end of that continuum. But then one can look a little deeper and say, well, what types of technologies were used? How synchronous were they? How rich were they? And that then gives us additional variation in virtuality. Generally, one would think of a team being more highly virtual when they rely on less rich technology and less synchronous technology. Right. So that's the technology-mediated communication side. On the geographic dispersion side, we can look at things like how just spatial dispersion, how far apart are team members. Mm-hmm. But then you can look at things like how many time zones are crossed within the team. That's temporal dispersion. Mm-hmm. We can look at the overall pattern of dispersion. Do we have subgroups? So there are also a lot of different subdimensions of geographic dispersion that one can look at. And each of those could potentially interact with each other, which I'm interested in exploring, but I'm also interested in really exploring interactions between virtuality and different cultural values. So there's research to suggest that certain teams with members that have certain cultural orientations will maybe function more effectively in more highly virtual environments. Right. Or we could look at cultural diversity and see how that, so does that help? I don't want to keep going on, but does that help?
Yeah, that clarifies it very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the typical types of processes one might want to look at that seem to be very important in virtual teams are things such as trust, conflict, communication, those types of things.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'll say right away that, yes, we can measure all of the things that you mentioned. So we have a lot of processes, as you said, from trust to communication to conflicts to, just about anything that happens in the team. Okay. Obviously, performance is the ultimate outcome.
Sure.
But when it comes to virtuality, I like the term very much. Yes, we can, technology,
Yeah.
geography, dispersion, we have measures for all of those.
Right. Can I just ask, in which file would one find the team process measures? I wasn't seeing conflict and things like that. Where are those located?
So most of those things, as you understand, originate at the individual level.
Sure.
So, for example,
Yeah.
if you wanted to measure some sort of average level of trust, you would basically get the individual.
Yes.
You have some measures of that kind. If you're looking at, for example, communication, who communicates with whom, how frequently, and again, most of that, again, is in the individual level files.
Is conflict also in the individual? Is conflict also in the individual?
Yes. Again,
Okay.
for example, every week we ask, have you had any conflicts last week? And so again, if you wanted to aggregate it to the team level, I'm not sure if you want to take an average or total or sum, but I guess the ultimately the data would come from individuals, and then it's a question of how you integrate them at the team level.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'll pop in just for a second. This is Wendy with an I. I really like this idea, Sharon, and definitely see some overlap there and a potential to collaborate. I would be very interested. There is maybe one cultural value I'm thinking of that I think could play a role.
Yes.
Even I'm thinking more in terms even of cultural norms for, what kind of communication is appropriate, what is said and how is it said. Those kinds of variables just intuitively, I think, and based on my own personal experience, have an impact on how people communicate virtually. And I think it's a really interesting question. I don't know of anything that's really looked at that. So I would definitely be interested in looking at that.
That's great. Some of the cultural values, Wendy, that I have looked at preliminary are, individualism, collectivism, uncertainty avoidance. We've found these tie to team norms. I have a project that's shown that. But I'm also extremely interested in high-low context. I don't know if X culture has that, but there are a lot of theoretical reasons why that would be theoretically important in virtual teams, and no one's really looked into that, but I think that's an extremely important cultural value to take a look at in that context.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
We have all of those, yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, the only thing that I would mention here is so the different components of the things you described have been attempted to be looked at before, but nobody was looking at the interplay. So from that perspective, I believe that's a perfectly new study. We have one under review at this time where we look at the different types of diversity and how they impact performance. So, and that includes, geographic dispersion, time zone dispersion, demographics, culture, and so on. But it's no interplays, nothing. It's just a purely, what kind of diversity has the greatest impact on what kind of outcome. When it comes to technology, we did attempt in the past to do studies on communication channel choices and how they impact all kinds of things. And one of the problems we ran into is that at the time when you specify the problem, like for example, as you said, synchronous, asynchronous communication types, or channel richness, just the text or audio or video, it sounds very simple. The problem we ran into is that in reality, it's so much more complicated that it's virtually impossible to express it in a single index or even in several indices. And the reason for that is the following. Even if you can classify the communication channels in terms of their, let's say, for example, media richness, let's say you have only email, which is asynchronous and text only, then, chats, which is synchronous and text, and then, you add audio, video. The sources of those data on how they communicated are basically 17 members. And what happens is that some people tell you one thing and others tell you another thing. So some say that we use this and others say you use that. Some, as you said, sub-teams, maybe I was using Skype all the time with this team member, but I was using only email with that team member. Then you have the frequency. So, all right, let's say if the use of video channel helps. But what if one team had only one video conference and another one had it daily? Or what if one had one video conference, but the other one had 10,000 email conferences? So once you get all those frequencies and durations and symmetries as reported by different team members into account, we literally just couldn't come up with a good way to condense it to a single index for communication channel richness, for example. So my hope is that you will be able to come up with a better solution. At this time, what we're doing is literally conducting data as we speak, already have a few dozen responses. We listed all of the communication channels that are possible, from email to Skype to Google Hangouts to Dropbox, Doodle, whatever. And so we're asking professors to rate how they perceive the richness of those channels. And so, sort of have some sort of benchmarking, and then use those as weights times basically frequency. And hopefully that will give us some sort of a measure. But again, it seems like a very simple concept, but once you have data from multiple team members, it's if it was at one meeting and you observed it and you saw what they used and it was 1 hour for everyone, then it would be a very simple thing. But since different teams communicate a different number of times and different team members with different team members, so be prepared to spend some time on just operationalizing those variables. We do have all the raw data, that's the good news, but it's a mathematical effort to put it all together into a variable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is one of the challenges in virtual teams research, and it can get very messy, so there would need to be some thinking.
Yeah, we looked at the studies that looked at it, and so in most cases they would do a quick experiment where, let's say, for example, 20 teams would be formed out of psychology students or class, and then they would do a simulation for 20 minutes, and then some of them would be literally allowed to use only text, others would have a video feed, and then the professor would collect the data and then just see those who had only text, if they perform better than those who also had video. But that's very controlled, very manipulated. In our case, different teams use different things, different team members use different things, and it goes on for a long time. Some communicate daily, others. So it's not as simple, but still, again, you have all the rich data, so you can just select the clean cases out of thousands of teams, select 200 teams that are definitely using only this or only that, or you can have some sort of a weighted index or, multiple dimensions, perhaps, as you said. So all of those are options.
Sure. Thank you.
Who's next? I can very briefly share my idea for a new study I wanted to do. So we have about 1,000 teams in a given semester, and we have about 150, 140 professors who manage those teams. And when the project is over, the deal is that every professor has to evaluate the reports from the teams that this professor's students were members of. As a result, we have basically each professor evaluating somewhere between 20 to 200 reports. And then, in fact, Karen Linden here evaluated like 300 of them this semester. She had a lot of students. But in any case, in the end, we have each report evaluated by about 5 to 7 professors. And so we usually just look at those evaluations and use them as a measure of quality. But an interesting question is how are the evaluation styles different across the professors? And so there are several evaluation styles that are sort of identifiable just by a quick look at it. Like, for example, we know that some professors are strict and some are lenient. And so some always give high grades, others give always low grades. We have some professors who differentiate a lot across teams. So if they evaluate 20 reports, they may give very low grades to some teams and very high to others. And some professors give roughly the same grades to everyone, maybe plus or minus 1 point. We have some professors who discriminate a lot across the dimensions of the evaluations, and others don't. Like, for example, some professors, if they like the report, they just give everything 7. And if they don't like the report on every of the dimensions, and we have like 12 evaluation dimensions, formatting, economic viability, quality of the executive summary, quality of each section, creativity, all kinds of, dimensions. And so, as I said, some professors, if they like it, they give on everything, let's say 7. If they don't like it, everybody, or on every dimension, they will give a low grade. But others differentiate a lot. So they may say, okay, formatting is excellent, you get a 7. But I don't believe that your idea is economically viable. So you get, let's say, for example, a 1 on this one. And then obviously, some leave a lot of feedback, others leave very little feedback. Some of them are late and others are always on time. Some may not even submit their evaluations. We always have about 5 professors out of 100 who just don't submit theirs, like literally just don't do it. And so the question then becomes, what predicts those evaluation styles? Those evaluations play a huge role. If it's the context of students, obviously, depending on what grades you get from your professor, you can have very different opportunities in life. If you get good grades, you can get, better job and, basically have a whole different career trajectory than if you get lower evaluations from your professors. Likewise, if you treat the professors as managers, again, promotion, selection, so all those evaluations, development, especially depending on how much feedback you provide or perhaps how encouraging your grades are. So all of that may determine basically who gets promoted, who gets the job, as well as who gets developed and performs better in the future and who gets discouraged and perhaps, stops performing. And so I don't know what the predictors could be, but it seems to me it would be interesting to take a look at things like, for example, culture. And it can be the personal cultural values of the professors, but also what country they come from and things like that. Demographics, things like, perhaps age, gender, academic pedigree, what university they graduated from, the rank of the university where they teach, years of experience, maybe things like even we can literally look at those names and see, how many publications they have, basically H index and other things. And so much of those data about professors we already have, like we know what country they are in, we know what school they graduated from and stuff like that. Some of those data are easy to find on the internet. And so it seems to me it would be an interesting study to see what explains all those differences in evaluations. And maybe even in the future as a follow-up paper to see if the different evaluation styles correlate with student performance. So are professors who strict, maybe their students perform better, or maybe those who are lenient, maybe their students perform better, or maybe those who provide more feedback, like literally write a page or 2 pages of feedback on every report, maybe their students perform better, and things like that. And so it seems like it would be on the one side of the equation, what predicts the supervisor evaluations, and then as a separate paper, what do supervisor evaluations predict in turn or correlate with. And so it's a very raw idea at this time, but it seems to me like it's something that...
This is Wendy with a Y.
Yes, please, Wendy, go ahead. Yes, we can hear you. Yes, go ahead, please.
One thing that we were just discussing here on this end is there's a difference I noticed between, say, grading in the States and grading here. Right. For example, I could give a student a 50 or 55 and know that that student would still pass with a C.
Right. And by the way, we do...
Whereas in the US, if they're getting a 50 or a 55, they're getting an F. And that would impact how strongly you'd grade somebody, because if I'm thinking C in the US, I would give them a 70 or above, whereas if I'm thinking a C here, I can give them a 50, and that's where I would be mentally.
And yes, institutional differences matter, and actually I didn't think about that, but you're absolutely right. The beauty is that we know how those evaluation systems work in different professors' classes because we ask them, as well as we do ask them, for example, how they will evaluate this project. What percentage will be allocated to the report itself, what percentage of the grade will be allocated to the, for example, quality of the, peer evaluations, as well as we know what percent of the total course grade is attributed to X-Culture. Some professors give only 20%, others give 40, 50, and some literally that's the course. And so we do have information about those institutional differences. And yeah, I think that's a very good, maybe it's not has nothing to do with personality or culture. Maybe it's all institutional. So we do have that information. You can take a look. Yeah.
But you could use the score of, because it goes up to 7, so 0 to 7 in each category, 0 to 7 for the overall. So therefore, I'm not really giving, a 5 might be, I don't have to worry about assigning it a B- or a C+ type of thing. So maybe all of us would still think of that 5 or 7. We've got 1 is going to be a terrible report. 7's going to be one of the best ones, possibly.
Yeah, and we do have the evaluation rubrics. So we do explain, for example, what should constitute a 7 and a 5 and a 4 and so on. But still, when you look at the evaluations, some people, like, for example, Peter Mengeson is very strict, if you know him. So he hardly ever goes above 4. And then we have some people who like almost all 7s. Not to mention that, again, I'm not sure if we want to differentiate that as a separate evaluation style, but we do have some people who are just like plain sloppy, like literally give all 7s and say good job. I mean, I don't even know if they read the report, and we do have at least a couple of those every semester. So where you kind of suspect that they just simply, We also played one semester with, every time we calculate the intra-rater reliability, but I once also calculated sort of the kind of professor to the rest correlation. And I just wanted to see who is most different from others. And usually you see a pretty good consistency. Most people, their evaluations correlate well with evaluations of the average, essentially. But occasionally you have professors whose evaluations are like almost negatively correlated. And so you don't know why. So why did they see it so differently? Is it something, again, we can look at that. It will take some exploration and data mining, but it seems like it's, again, important both from the managerial point of view, but also from academic point of view. So I suppose a paper like this could be published both in a management journal, but also in an education journal. So, and by the way, yes, I do welcome co-authors very much. So, so definitely here, I have no idea what the theoretical foundation might be. I mean, I see the question and I need the answer because, for managing the project, but I have no idea what fancy theory we can kind of wrap it in. Likewise, when it comes to the analysis, not only that it may be complicated if you want to take it far, but also it will be just a lot of work, just the sheer volume of the variables that we may be looking at. It just may take some time, with data mining and then testing different models. So any help would be much appreciated if you're interested in this study. So, and since you're all teachers, I suppose, at the very least on that front, you have something to say, and then culture obviously is again something of interest to all of you. So again, very interested in collaboration here.
One comment on the data side, I think from the entities that we have created, you're talking about the class level. That's the best we get as instructor. So there's going to have to be some work to separate class out into instructors and then track back how many times a given instructor's participated over the years and so forth.
Yeah,
so a lot of data.
Justin is more familiar with the data, so one of the nightmares here will be to actually prepare the data. It's not the type of the data that is easily, like we will have to look at some different, as we call them, entities. And so, additionally, we may even have to literally go online and look for some of those data about the professors. As I said, like, for example, Google, if they've published and how much and things like that, when they graduated, literally find the resume. We can probably reach out to professors and ask for copies of their CV, and much of the information we may need will come from there. And in fact, we do have CVs of a good half of the professors, because at the time of the application, they are welcome to submit them, and most do. But so again, something that may take time to fully prepare. All right, so I don't know who wants to go next.
Hi, it's Karen. I've got several ideas, and I am new to research, so bear with me. I'm just going to read out a couple that I was brainstorming on. One of them relates to, so I'll start there, is to what you were talking about, Vas, where when I look at my almost 300 students from the late track of spring, I think I've got a pretty good sample size there. When I look at the final report, do the teams that I rate, let's say, a 1 or a 2, very low end, are there other professors that have rated those reports 6 or 7? Something, completely a different thought process that I had. And then to go back to those papers and to see what I thought, and hopefully it might be where there's a paper, let's say that we've got 5 different professors. And so if most of us gave that 6 or 7, but then there was one, and we might find, oh, well, it was Peter all along, that is the outlier with that. But it just might be interesting to say, oh, when I give somebody a 6 or 7, what are those other professors ranking them? Because I've seen where in past semesters, maybe I've ranked harder, but sometimes there are those outliers, and it's interesting to look at that. And what can I learn, perhaps even from the perspective of an instructor giving feedback to students by evaluating what I've looked at compared to what the other instructors have researched. So that was kind of one idea. And then I thought also another research idea is, do teams that rate each other as those peer evaluations as a 5 every single week, do they perform well in the end? Do they score those papers that I would rate a 6 or 7, or are they mediocre? So I guess I'm going with the premise of they're giving each other a pass, saying, oh, we're all wonderful, 5, 5, 5. But does it really translate into a well-functioning or a final product that's valuable? And then I've got some other ideas, but maybe I'll stop there because there's feedback that you might be able to provide.
I'm surprised, Karen, but I don't think we ever tried to correlate average peer evaluations in the team and the quality of the reports of the team. At least, we often use them as the two possible outcomes, but I don't think we ever looked at the correlations. And I would not be surprised if they are low and possibly even negative. I don't know. So,
okay.
I don't know. No idea.
So possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of the times when I'm thinking about these papers, I'm thinking about, well, how can I, in the classroom, do a better job of helping students perform well on the project? So one thing I was thinking about doing is saying, in reviewing all of my papers, so I can look at each of those 12 dimensions, and I think about these things, but then I get busy and I don't dig into the data. So I really just can spend some good time with even my own report data to say, let's say I look at all the dimensions, and then executive summary is, wow, a lot of these are 3, the average is 3. And so for my scale, on the other side of 4 is bad. And so I would need to spend more time in my classroom perhaps talking about what creates an excellent executive summary, because when I look at all those dimensions, I might say, here, or they're doing really well with marketing, or maybe they're not doing well with marketing, and you spend more time in the classroom talking about those concepts or helping them develop their paper in that way. Yeah,
that's a purely pedagogical question, yeah. If I may, again, I like the idea of looking at the different performance indicators, how they correlate with one another. Not only can you look at how peer evaluations, average peer evaluations in teams correlate with the team product quality. So do those that give each other 5s are happy with one another? Are they more likely to write a good report? You can also look at, for example, self-evaluations of report quality versus professor evaluations of report quality. So again, do those students that feel good about their reports, are they also, are those the reports that professors also rate highly? I have no idea what the correlation is. So never even looked at it. So, all right, who's next? Let's do a couple more.
So, Vas, this is Sharon. If I could just interrupt very briefly. I actually will have to leave at the top of the hour, and so I want to, before somebody else starts speaking, I don't want to interrupt them. What would be the best thing to do? Just to look at the recording to see what the next steps decided were?
Yeah, exactly, yes. It's being recorded.
Okay.
So I feel, so Wendy had to leave, so we'll have the recording so you can always watch the remainder. So, and hopefully we will not go for more than a few more minutes.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah. All right. So do we have anyone else who didn't share your ideas and wants to share if you have some?
Yeah, I can quickly go ahead. So as I was listening to others' ideas, it seems like there is some intersection with what I'm interested in and a couple of researchers. So I mentioned that recently I've really delved into comparing deep versus surface level diversity in teams and examining how that impacts team process and outcome. So for surface level, it's kind of just like gender, age, ethnicity. Deep level, I looked at cultural norms, specifically tight versus loose norms. I've done a couple of studies, and in those ones, I found that the deep level diversity has more impact on the process, particularly on subgroup formation and diverse teams over time. So I have a paper with Wendy, and one of them is revise and resubmit status already. So I have a couple of questions about the current data set. So I wanted to kind of get a sense whether there's any output or any measure that taps onto sort of like a tight norm in a team versus loose norm. So a tight norm would be where there's like strict rules and regulations, strict processes, roles that are assigned to people versus sort of like a loose type of team norm where everyone is kind of told like you can do whatever you want as long as we get the outcome done. So I'm interested in seeing if there's any measures that we can kind of tap into that. And
well, for that one, so if I can address it right away before we go to the next one, every week we ask every team member, so there are several questions, but one of them is, have you decided, do you know who does what? So essentially, is in your team, is it clear, who's responsible for what? And then the same one, or the next question is schedule. Have you decided, have you discussed, and have you agreed upon on the deadlines. So, when things have to be done. And so, yes, there are some teams that say, yes, we've had discussions and we decided and everybody knows who's working on what. So I suppose you can call it a tight norm, and others like no idea. So we're sort of kind of deciding it on the fly. And so, I'm not sure what I will be working on next week. Would that be a good proxy?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yes.
So I'm interested in kind of the earlier work that I've done, we actually used the measure by Michelle Gelfand on tightness norms. But if we don't have that, I think that's a good proxy for sure. And the idea of it is that you have some teams where people have strict rules and regulations and everyone kind of has to abide by it. And there's specific roles that are assigned to each member versus sort of like more fluid and flexible interaction and no rigidity in their norms of interaction.
Yeah, so the tightness looseness in the kind of Michelle Gelfand's terms is a little notoriously hard to capture. I mean, as a concept, it's very clear. But as a measure, I guess, the definition is that in this culture, people are expected to adhere to certain norms. But then again, in a team, how would you measure that? I guess it would have to be a separate question about how things are done in a team. So we sort of know whether or not they have a plan and, adhere to those norms. But the perception, so we can take a closer look and see. I'm sure we'll come up with some proxies, at least for the initial analysis, and maybe collect some additional data later on. So.
Yeah, that would be great if we can take a look at that. And the other thing I'm also wondering is whether we can capture potential subgroup formation. So if you have a big team, I'm sure there's going to be like some members that are more, closely interacting with other members versus others. Is there a way for us to kind of get a sense of like in a team of 4 and a team of 6, there were like 3 subgroups or 2 subgroups?
Yeah, we have those data. In fact, in some semesters, we even forced a formation of subgroups and had a clear cut. But we do ask how closely have you worked with each of the team members. And if you want to look at those, you can definitely kind of decipher who worked with whom. So again, it may take some effort because, again, it's not as clean. I can say that I work primarily with Mariana, for example, and Justin. But Justin said that he mainly worked with, for example, Sharon. And so sometimes it's, but yeah, you should be able at least to have the initial data that you can work with to see if there were subgroups and who worked with whom.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, because if I can find that, then that would be a nice potential replication of some of the findings that we observed with a smaller sample size. And the other thing I'm also interested in is sort of like social networks. So within a team, did they know each other from prior interactions?
Right.
How well they got to know each other, and seeing if like that as a moderating factor. So I'm still interested in comparing deep versus subversible diversity interactions in teams, but looking at social networks as a moderating factor.
Yeah, social networks, that's something that definitely, needs to be used because we have so much data that can only be analyzed as a network analysis. And so I'm glad that somebody's expressing interest because honestly, I wouldn't even know how to do it but I definitely see a huge potential there. So.
Okay, all right, great.
So I have a question. I think we have a common research interest there about the networks, but I would actually ask Voss or perhaps you. I know the data somewhat, and I'm actually struggling to find an item or a way we've measured something that remotely resembles a network or a relationship between actors, as opposed to simply an assessment, say in peer evaluations.
We have several actually that are specifically network, and in fact, it's almost impossible to measure them some other way. One, we do have the acquaintanceship test, so where we measure how well people know each other. And so here we know how well you know every person and how well every person knows you. And so usually we just kind of average that out and try to use it as an average. But ultimately, it is a network type of data. Then same thing with peer evaluations. Again, we look at the averages, but we know who gives what to whom. And so probably a proper way to analyze it is to look if there is some sort of reciprocity going on. Maybe I always give Justin a 5 and he always gives me a 5, instead of just letting, looking at my average 4 from the rest of the team or my average 4 that I give to the rest of the team. And then we also have questions like, for example, how close you were to each of the team members. again, that's, when it comes to maybe sub-team analysis, as well as, just simply looking at some sort of relationships that go in the teams. Again, I would see a list of all of my team members, and I say, okay, I was very close with Justin. I was very close with, for example, Karen, but not so close with John and Bob. And again, I suppose in some cases we can just simply average it, but it becomes, much more, it would be much more logical to evaluate it as a network analysis. Even things like, for example, leadership. So we ask who was the leader. And so we again kind of take the average formal leader, informal leader, follower, and did not participate. But it would be much more interesting to look at who gave whom what, because if I say that Justin was a leader, it's not necessarily the case that, for example, I don't know, Mariana will say that Justin was a leader. And then you can see that maybe I say Justin was a leader because we communicated with him a lot, but maybe he didn't communicate with John much, and so John didn't see Justin as a leader. So some of those things, as I said, we try to average it, but it doesn't make sense to average it because it's a much more complicated network interplay. And I think I'm not very familiar with the network analysis, but it seems to me that that would be the tool to analyze it. I mean,
okay.
Correct
So
me
I guess
if you know more. Tell me if that's how I understand it. If I understand it correctly.
Well, you can do it several ways, and it sounds like you have a weighted network there. But I guess in order to further understand or follow up your comment, I would actually have to know what questions are asked in the peer evaluation entity, because I don't know them right now, and I've been working with this data for a while. So you need to sort of share that, and so we can take next.
Talking about that, Justin, in fact, we do specifically have a separate entity for peer evaluations and separate entity for acquaintanceship, because there is really no other way to incorporate it in the individual data set. I mean, we do have the averages just because many people want to see the average peer evaluations. But, to keep the raw data, you literally have to keep it almost like a matrix. And in fact, two matrices, because, that's given and that's received. And so, again, I don't know much about network analysis, but my understanding is that that's precisely what it deals with.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, so with your help and Jalia, maybe you know more about that methodology and hopefully can make sense of those data.
And actually, in a past paper, it might have even been with Marjana, I've developed a script that calculates centrality within team centrality in a weighted social network. So we can apply it to these different content areas and have lots to explore, as long as we can fill in what measures actually are.
Yeah, well, that's way beyond me, all that centrality and closeness. And I've heard some of those terms, but I have no idea how to calculate them. So.
Yeah, no worries. Actually, without further ado, maybe I should introduce my thought. I have to remember what my thought was because I don't have many. Yeah. So the idea here was about pacing. So my idea was that maybe there's different characteristics within a team that depart from the traditional assumption that midpoint is important. Generally speaking, punctuated equilibrium suggests that we wait, and then halfway through the work becomes important, and then we start working. And so this is what we call pacing. So it's sort of a left to the end of your duration. So I would suggest that perhaps there's different team characteristics or assortment of heterogeneity, homogeneity within a team that leads to different patterns, and we can isolate what those characteristics might be.
So can you explain it a little bit more in detail?
Okay, so for example, many of the original studies about this pacing or this punctuated equilibrium really deals with people or in many ways homogeneous. So maybe they're confident, for example, that they know what they're doing, and then so they're lax, and then the midpoint comes in, oh, we better start working, and so they start working. But if you're in a context where it's more heterogeneity, I can't say the word, but more heterogeneous, thank you, then maybe people are less lazy, so to speak, and they understand that there's going to be problems, and so the rate or the pacing, the regulation of their work is more equal, or perhaps even downward sloping in that they upload or front load all the work so that when the end comes, they've got everything done because they anticipate it to be harder.
But how would you measure that? What would be the perfect measure? I think we do have some measure that could be used as a proxy for pacing. So we know how active people are in different weeks and the team as a whole. So would that be a good way to measure it, or what's the best way to, like, how would you express that punctuated what is it, equilibrium, or?
Yeah, that's fine. In my original entry in the document, I said communication, but someone rightly suggested, well, communication could be anything and it need not be work related. So I agree with that. But in peer evaluations, you have, or we've captured something to do with amount of work done or effort that everyone's put forward. So we could do that on a 1 to 10 week cycle.
That's true. That's true. We have it weekly. We also ask at the end of the semester, in addition, we ask how active was your team each of the week, you know, looking back, each of the whatever weeks, 8 weeks. And so you can also look at how the team as a whole, at least how it was perceived by the team members, how active it was. But then, yes, you can look at the individual weekly evaluations as well. And then you can see, you know, did this person do much this week versus next week and so on. Yes, you're right. Again, it may require some sort of time series analysis, but yeah.
Exactly. And so, and then you have interesting moderators. So for example, let's say, I'm making stuff up on the fly here. Let's say it's a heterogeneous team and therefore the results are what we suggest and there's a lot of work at the beginning and not so much work at the end. However, if on average you have a lot of people in the team who are culturally intelligent, maybe that actually takes away and negates the differences and the expected change in pacing or work regulation, which is interesting because CQ is often said it's a good thing, but here it actually could be a bad thing, right?
Right.
And do you have a formal leader? You could explore all kinds of different moderators that not only that change the trajectory of work regulation as opposed to just a single outcome.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting, you know, it's much more sophisticated than just simply let's take a look at whether A affects B. So as long as you can, you know, carry it out methodologically, it seems like we have the data that, you know, would be suitable for this sort of study.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, we have only Wendy with the Y left. Wendy, are you ready to share some ideas?
So I guess I've been sharing them in the background here. One of the questions I was asking, which we're going back and forth about, was whether we had correlated the ratings from the students to their extremes. So for example, it's been often said that Asians tend to be more central in their rankings, whereas US tend to be more tends to be more extreme.
And you're talking about peer evaluations here?
Yes, exactly.
Or instructors.
Or instructors. And I mean, one thing we were saying is it's sort of like a go or no go kind of thing, but if there were a quick way to test it out on the data to see if there was some sort of pattern there, that might be interesting to explore further to see if this truly is something as past literature has suggested.
Yes, so I'm showing here the only challenge here is depending on where you want to move it. But one of the potential challenges is that we do have an ongoing study on cross-cultural differences in peer evaluation styles. It's been a long time since the study started, and it's sort of been dormant for the last at least year or so. But I remember we had intensive discussions as to, you know, what kind of evaluation styles are even possible, peer evaluation styles are possible. And so we were able to identify, how many do we have here, like 6 or 7 of them. And so one of them was, you know, extreme versus central tendency, but then we also looked like self-evaluations versus peer evaluations, sort of kind of self-promotion versus modesty and stuff like that. So maybe if you want to take a look at this study and see if you can design yours differently, or maybe take a specific aspect and focus on it, or maybe, as I said, this study has been really not, you know, not been promoted much or not has been worked much lately. And so maybe it would be a good idea to have someone like you who will revitalize it. So we have Dirk, he's in Australia, who started the study, and we have probably 4 or 5 people involved in it. But as I said, not much has happened ever since we came up with the kind of conceptual models, but we haven't really done anything else since then. So Yeah, I'll send you the link.
One other comment, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
One comment about current ongoing studies. Something that popped into my mind when we were having connectivity issues here was at the beginning, I believe it was Sharon discussed virtuality. And I guess you, because I think you were involved in the paper about differences, all differences are not different or something. You need to differentiate those two papers so that you don't do an overlap.
That's exactly, yes. So as I said, we do have a paper where we look at the effects of all kinds of differences. But in the one that we have, we just look, so you have like 20 different types of diversities. And then you have two basic types of outcomes, process and quality of work. And so we wanted just to see the correlations. So we didn't look at the communication, richness, technologies, so all the things that Sharon mentioned. So I think what she does, there may be some overlap in some of the, some of the variables. But I do see those two not only as substantially different, but what Sharon described, it sounded to me more like a whole research stream as opposed to just single paper. So I will not be surprised if it will actually lead to multiple publications, each with a slightly different angle, maybe a slightly different hypothesis in that chain. So I wouldn't worry too much about the overlaps because it seems like so much is going on there that there will be more than enough opportunities to isolate something that is substantially different from simply comparing the different diversity types.
Okay, so trying to drive towards a conclusion. I know everyone is looking to their clocks and other things. The way I understand it, even though I was disconnected for a while, I've seen at least 4 different topics here. A virtuality topic, a professor evaluation topic, something to do with networks, and then I guess my idea of pacing or work regulation is in there. And I think there was a deeper surface idea. I'm not sure how we would measure tightness and looseness, but certainly we would have an ability to address subgroups, and maybe that's even part of the network thing. I don't know. So given the fact that there's 10 of us or so, I would suggest we begin to coalesce in 2, maybe 3 subgroups, so then we can work independently as opposed to need a time where all of us are available.
That's a good idea too. And also, again, even though everybody is more than welcome to work alone, it may not be such a bad idea to identify maybe a few most promising ideas. And then, as I said, like, for example, for the one that I shared, I would be very, very happy to have co-authors. And so it seems like others are also open to the idea of co-authorship. So maybe even though we will have about a dozen people total, but maybe it may be a good idea to condense the number of papers to maybe 4 most interesting ones. And so this way it will allow us to be a little bit more focused when it comes to the discussions, as well as more people working in the same study, more can be done. So I think it may be more productive in the end. So I'll be very happy to either drop my idea and join someone if you prefer, or if you're not entirely sure about your idea and you want to join my idea, we can do that. Though again, if you prefer to work alone, definitely a viable option. So it may be faster just because you don't have to deal with the group dynamics. So all of those are, perfectly acceptable options.
But just to jump in there, Vas, it's good that we work alone and yeah, coordination costs certainly add up given the fact that we're all over the world and so forth. Yeah. But I would maybe push back on that a little bit and say the whole idea of having the hackathon or the research conference is for us to work together. So if you want to take your idea and work on alone, that's great. But strongly, I guess, as unpowerful or impowerful that I am, because I have power over nothing, join a team. So then when we meet face to face, we can actually work together. Yeah.
After we will have done it enough times, we'll actually write a study on whether those who participate in hackathons alone versus those who work in teams, if there is a difference in performance. I don't know which one will do better because, I can imagine that somebody working alone sort of, kind of once we're done with the active session and then have like a couple of hours for individual work, those who go and work in a team, they probably will be talking too much about life and too much about each other. Whereas the one who is alone just kind of closes himself in his room and just does the research and nothing else. So I'm not sure which one actually will turn out to be more productive. For now, we don't know. So we encourage everyone to work in a team. But yeah, after about 10, 20 of these hackathons, I think we'll have enough data to do a study of that.
Okay, so what are next steps? How do we coalesce in 2 or 3 themes? So how do we do that?
Good question. I don't know. We can have some more discussion now in writing, either by email or in Dropbox or in some sort of a group. or we can have, some thinking and maybe reconnect again in like 2 weeks and then have another discussion. And then I think we should have probably at least one more before we meet face to face, right?
Yeah, we could as a big group. Certainly administratively, maybe it's good to touch base with everybody. But truthfully, if we're going to break down into small groups anyway, maybe the next meeting just is a group of 3 or 4.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah. Well, right. So I wonder if there is a way to, for us, Justin, maybe you can be that central figure. If we can now share our thoughts, we thought about everything and maybe share with you, okay, I like that idea, I think I can help, or maybe, I like this idea, and see if we kind of naturally some groups will emerge. And then if so, if several people want to work on a particular study, then maybe, yes, we will just agree, okay, let's meet among ourselves. Likewise, for me, what might help also, if, the sooner we know who works on what, I can prepare the data and send the complete data sets to those people way in advance. So we don't have to wait until we actually meet. So maybe some people can even start looking at the data beforehand. So I don't know if somebody wants to work alone, fine. If somebody wants to work in a team, but let's say, for example, you say, okay, I would like to have data on this, this, and this. Maybe, we can start doing that right away. What do you think, Justin? What's the best way forward? It seems like we lost Justin again. Justin, are you still here?
No, this is what I'll suggest, because we are also missing some people, and they may in fact might want to watch the video before they sign up. Maybe we send another Word document and have the people who are kind of somewhat responsible for the idea now put a brief description together and have others just sign up. And if we have too many of one idea, maybe we have to reorganize, but I'd like this to be a self-selection kind of process.
Yeah. The only question I have, Justin, is it best to do it in Dropbox, or is it easier to create maybe a Google Docs file, like an Excel file where you list all the studies, all the people, and see, or would it be best to have like email correspondence and then you just kind of enter the results in a table? I'm just trying to see, and if it's in Dropbox, would it be best to have then a separate document for each study, or would it be best to put it all in one document? So I'm just not sure what's the best, easiest way to manage all that, record all that information. Maybe think about, what works best for you, but just to keep it readable, but also manageable.
I like the Google Doc or the Excel spreadsheet idea. And then also we can, as we want to offer to other people what we could possibly bring to it. So some will mention methodology and some will say editing and etc. So that might be helpful.
I suppose we can even stay, if it's easier for Justin, we can stay in Dropbox. But, if we have a separate document for each, like, for example, the way I described my study, I put the title and my name. And I suppose Karen did the opposite, name and then title. But if we have, a separate file for each of the ideas, then I guess, people can literally open it and add, I would like this sort of help, and they can add their help. Or, it can be some sort of a kind of Google Docs Excel file or spreadsheet where people literally just say those things right there. Or maybe send that information to Justin, and Justin will populate some sort of a table that everybody can access and see where we stand. But I guess, Justin, I'm not sure if you're still here. Maybe the best next step would be, let's share the recording, allow people to see the recording, see what the responses are, and then maybe decide on the next step after that. I'm open to the idea, since it's kind of vacation, summer break. Maybe we have 3 weeks before the meeting, right? 4 weeks, something like that. And so maybe even have, another one, or maybe, maybe have even a couple more, just trying to stay within an hour or so for the meeting. But let's see what comes out, in terms of, what people will send you in terms of their comments. So let me know, or, everybody know.
Okay, I'm gonna have the room.
All right, so I guess let's stop here.
So people are emailing me, is that the plan?
I don't know. Why don't you think about it and, just let us know the easiest way how we should send our thoughts to you. in
Okay.
email, or if you want to create a file
Okay.
where we will write them, you know, things like that. So you just tell us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, well then, yeah, let's wait for Justin's decision how to, you know, go forward. Will it be text-based or another meeting like this one? And then we'll just go from there. All right. Okay, well, thank you everyone then. And yeah, let's stay in touch.